Top 10 waiver wire adds for week 17. It is championship week, people. We are finally here. And whether you are in the championship matchup, fighting it out for third place, or even playing for your honor in general, because there is no quitting you, or even there's no judgment here, maybe just making sure that you are not going to get that last place punishment, I've got your most start-worthy options, your stream-worthy options for this week for one last ride. And yet again, because the injuries keep on coming, oh my gosh, we actually do have usable options this week to pick up. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Yeah, that's right. I'm starting it off with Tyler Shough. Tyler Shough, I'm getting spicy here. I know you would never think that Tyler Shough would be the top waiver wire ad of the week at any point this season, but here we are. And I think that quarterback might be the actual most critical waiver wire ad of this week because, again, we have so many injuries, right? If you've got a Drake May, obviously this is not for you. But if you've got Jordan Love, Lamar Jackson, you were streaming JJ McCarthy, yeah, you might have to turn this route here and look at a Tyler Shough because of all the injury situations here. We talked about Tyler Shough in the waiver wire stash video, and with the injury to JJ McCarthy, Shough has now bumped his way up to my favorite streaming option for week 17. And while I know you're looking at me like, Tara, do I really want to trust Tyler Shough of all people in championship week? Yes, because we should have been trusting him for a while now. Shough has been more than solid and reliable, and more reliable than a lot of streaming options over the past 4 weeks. In week 13 against Miami, he had a solid outing with 18 fantasy points, finishing his QB 12 on the week. In week 14 against Tampa Bay, he got it done on the ground, completing 13 of 20 attempts for 144 yards. Very modest, but he added 55 yards on the ground and 2 rushing touchdowns to finish as QB 6 on the week. Last week against Carolina, he pushed volume, completing 24 of his 32 attempts for 272 yards and a touchdown, plus some added work on the ground there, 32 rushing yards for a very nice 18 fantasy points as well. And then this week, solid again, over 300 passing yards against the Jets and a touchdown as well. Week 17 is a great matchup against Tennessee. Shough is a very reliable streaming option this week for those of you who are trying desperately to piece together a solution with all of these quarterback injuries. Every time that I put Blake Corum in the waiver wire list, he was one of the most controversial players on the list just because people have a lot of polarizing views. They were either very much so in or very much so, nah, this production ain't real. But 4 weeks in a row, the production is real, people. Blake Corum is the gift that just keeps on giving. He saw his highest carries of the season in week 16 with 14 carries for 48 yards and a touchdown against a tough Seattle defense, a tough Seattle run defense, outproducing Kyren Williams from a fantasy perspective because he got the touchdown, of course. Now, Kyren Williams is the lead back. That's not changing here, but this just amplifies the message that we already had. The Rams' offense is so good, way too good, to the point where it makes 2 running backs fantasy viable options. Blake Corum has had a minimum of 13 fantasy points in each of the past 4 games in both excellent and terrible defensive matchups. Matt Stafford is absolutely dealing, maybe in his MVP season here, I don't know. And it means that no matter how strong the run defense is, the running backs will produce. Blake Corum is a solid flex option, and the Week 17 matchup against Atlanta is fairly decent. Pause. Now, before you yell at me and say, Tara, Michael Carter was awful in Week 16, and we cannot trust him in Week 17. It was not a good fantasy performance, but again, we're talking specifically about Week 17 and which players can have good days in Week 17 games because of matchups here. So while this was not a good fantasy performance in Week 16, we do have to look at Michael Carter because of the matchup this week against Cincinnati. Now, the fantasy performance, again, not good. And I did say that I didn't really trust the Cardinals, and at this point, I straight up just don't think I ever will trust the Cardinals, and that was slightly warranted here. While they didn't dupe us and flip and not make Michael Carter the lead back, they did give just enough work to Amari DiMercato and Corey Kiner to make this incredibly annoying. So Michael Carter had 11 carries for 65 yards, and he looked good to my eyes. Every time he touched the ball, I'm like, okay, yeah, he looks good. But Corey Kiner and Amari DiMercato also combined for 11 carries for 62 yards. Very convenient. But as I mentioned in the stash video, we are looking at Week 17, a great matchup against Cincinnati, heading into Week 16, actually. The Bengals had allowed the most fantasy points to opposing running backs, and their Week 16 stat line, I don't think that really helped there. They have been consistently allowing volume to running backs, and I do think that this Week 16 game for the Cardinals, in terms of the running back usage, was a slight anomaly, because the reason that it really didn't work out is because it was a weird game. Jacoby Brissett literally completed 0 passes to running backs. That straight up doesn't happen from him. Trey Benson and Bam Knight are done for the season. Michael Carter is the lead back. We've got the great matchup here. Logically, Michael Carter will be ranked as a low-end RB2 in Week 17. We're not chasing points with this one. Unfortunately, Kayshon Boutte went down with an injury, and while the direct replacement on the field will be Kyle Williams, Williams has never seen a significant target share or snap count. And even in situations where Kayshon Boutte went down previously, Williams didn't emerge as the reliable fantasy option. And we definitely have plenty of evidence that supports that the guy that gets the boost is actually Mack Hollins. Boutte was out in weeks 9 and 10, and in those games, Mack Hollins had 10 and 16 fantasy points, and the 10-point fantasy game was against the New York Jets. That is very convenient. I would expect an even better performance this week against the Jets because the Jets defense has just continued to tumble and tumble downhill and is closing out the season in a very rough place. Now, we also have Demario Douglas that went down with an injury, and while he's been very inconsistent, it's just more pieces that are missing to ensure that the target share is really focused in on Stephon Diggs, Mack Hollins, and Hunter Henry in an excellent matchup. So Mack Hollins realistically is a flex option this week. Just when you thought he was out, Parker Washington is back on the table here. Trevor Lawrence is dealing, my Clemson boy coming through here because the Clemson fans need something to hold on to. So let us have this. Let us have this pure moment of success for our Clemson boys, Trevor and Travis here, because everything else is going downhill. So this is our one thing to hold on to. Let me just pause right here to speak so glowingly on it. Yay, Trevor Lawrence and the redemption tour that is apparently the result of Liam Cohen being the true offensive genius of the NFL. But back to Parker Washington, it is entirely possible that the lack of production that we saw last week from Parker Washington was really just the result of him coming back from an injury. And maybe he was intentionally limited or getting back into swing of things because this week he was definitely anything but limited. He had 145 yards and a touchdown on 10 targets. Now, I wouldn't expect this exact level of productivity this week. Denver was a terrible matchup for Brian Thomas Jr., and this was likely Liam Cohen, our offensive genius, scheming up the best way to attack them, and Parker Washington and Britton Strange were perhaps the best routes to go in this matchup here. But it is tough to ignore the production because when Parker Washington has been healthy, he has often outperformed both Brian Thomas Jr. and Jacoby Myers. So again, there's a ton of mouths to feed, but it's good to know that Parker Washington is back on the table and healthy. Now, you might be wondering why I singled out Parker Washington when there are other flex-worthy options that have boom games as well. It is because I can literally point to 5 games between 10 and 26 fantasy points since Washington became the starter. This is less likely a blip, less likely a random boom performance, and you can make the argument that the last 2 subpar games were the direct result of injury, and that double-digit fantasy points should be the expectation from Parker Washington on any given week with the way that Trevor Lawrence is operating. And Indianapolis is a very pass-friendly matchup, so Washington is very start-worthy as a flex option this week. At this point, the Josh Jacobs knee injury is just an ongoing and never-ending issue, apparently. Josh Jacobs did end up playing despite the fact that we were told he was trending towards not playing, but he came through yet again. And oddly enough, the situation just got flat out even more confusing. Jacobs played his lowest snap count of a game that he played in full health of the entire season. And apparently that lack of usage was not related to the injury. Now, Matt LaFleur said that Jacobs' lack of usage came after his fumble in the third quarter, and it was not the result of a punishment, but instead mostly due to how well Emanuel Wilson was running, and that Jacobs did not injure his knee any further in the game. So what on earth do we make of this? Well, if I had to interpret this, and I have to, Jacobs wasn't really fully capable at full capacity, which we knew heading into the game. And as a result, Emanuel Wilson just flat out looked like the better back, and the Packers were in a must-win situation, so Matt LaFleur went with the healthiest back that was performing the best, and that was Emanuel Wilson. So again, that would make Emanuel Wilson a must-add for our fantasy purposes because this knee injury is just an ongoing issue. So we need to add him, hedging again that we might get the same result and that we even could maybe get Josh Jacobs sitting. I don't know. We just need to plan for it and have him on our bench just in case. On Sunday, we learned a very valuable lesson. We learned that the Saints' breaking point is apparently Audric Estime. That is it. That is the breaking point. When it turned to Devin Neal, they were willing to say, okay, we think you can handle the workload. We think you can be a lead back. Go with it. But apparently they draw that line at Audric Estime. Estime had 5 carries for 19 yards and 3 receptions on 4 targets for 17 yards. Taysom Hill had the most Taysom Hill stat line that a Taysom Hill could possibly have. I don't even feel like saying it. You can see it on the screen. He got it done through the air, on the ground, 3 receptions. Truly a jack of all annoying trades, right? We talked about it with Tyler Shough. The Saints have a great matchup with a team that is very vulnerable on the ground and through the air, which is great because Taysom Hill does both of those things, apparently. I was really hoping that I did not have to say Taysom Hill is a waiver wire ad at all this season, and we were so close. We were doing so good, but here we are. If you need a week 17 Hail Mary, Taysom Hill is a solid option. That pained me to say. I got personal beef with him as a long-term Alvin Kamara dynasty owner for years. So this is beef here. So if I'm recommending him, I'm being honest and saying, hey, this is real. This is real production, and it's really usable in week 17. The Saints offense is absolutely humming, and if it worked with Taysom Hill this week, I do at the very least trust Kellen Moore as a competent head coach to run it back if it worked. Mike Gesicki was one of my waiver wire stashes, and the hope was that Joe Burrow would snap back into reality and take advantage of the defensive matchups to close out the season. And he did more than snap back. He became the Joe Burrow that we all know and love. And he supplied his guys with ample volume and opportunities, and Gesicki had a solid day. 3 receptions on 4 targets for 35 yards and a touchdown. Now we move on to week 17, and the Bengals play an Arizona defense that allows, heading into week 16, the 7th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. And as I mentioned in the stash video, that again is saying a lot because we have to remember Arizona doesn't play Trey McBride, so their numbers are not trumped up. That is for real. They're a really good matchup for tight ends. Now, a lot of guys that we were relying on to close out the season, they're trending down. And if you don't have one of those clear, solid top 10 options, you might be better off streaming the best available option with an excellent matchup. And Mike Gesicki is, in fact, that guy. Sadly, we do have to address the Browns' backfield. Quinshon Judkins went down with an injury, not just an injury, a ridiculous combination of injuries. And that is important for you guys that are playing in keeper leagues to note, because it might be worth it to stash a Browns running back not named Quinshon Judkins, because more than likely someone else is going to be starting the season as the lead back next year. But for our purposes in week 17, we got to approach this in 2 ways. Jerome Ford is on IR, so cool, we know that. So we are left with 3 potential options. If Dylan Sampson can play, that is the route to go, period. But if Sampson cannot go and he did not practice all week, then you need to think preemptively and look at Raheem Sanders and Travion Williams. They split snaps dead even. Bulk of the work on the ground went to Sanders and bulk of the work receiving went to Williams. So it was Williams that had the better fantasy day. The matchup against Pittsburgh is tough. For the most part, until the end of the game there. They shut down the Lions running backs, but they've been lit up on the ground before, so it could go either way there. I still think that my lean here would be to go with the one that has the receiving upside, given the fact that in theory, they should be playing from behind. Checkdowns have been perfectly fine from Shadur Sanders as well, and there might not be a ton of goal line opportunities here. So with that said, I do lean towards Williams, and that might be a little more controversial because I know a lot of people like Sanders. If you want to lean towards the early down back and bulk of the yardage there, I totally get that. But if you're playing in full PPR, might be the better route to go with the pass catcher there. So again, our preference is to hope that Sampson can go and that they were just holding him out because the season was over, and maybe they sit here and say, hey, let's bring Sampson back. Maybe he's ready to go. But if not, again, look at both of the other running backs. I've seen enough. I trust Jawhar Jordan if Woody Marks is out again in week 17. Nick Chubb is not reverting to the lead back. Jordan had 15 carries for 53 yards. He caught all 5 of his targets for 17 yards. Chubb had 6 carries, 33 yards, 1 reception, 9 yards. This is 2 weeks in a row now that the Texans have trusted Jordan with a significant amount of carries compared to the other active backs. And the fact that he is being used very well in checkdowns as well is a big bonus there. Big bonus that gives him the lean. Week 17's matchup against the LA Chargers is not a good matchup at all, but we did see Dak Prescott handle the Chargers defense very well on Sunday. I just don't have that level of trust with CJ Stroud here, so that is why this is more towards the back of the list here. Deeper ad, potentially luxury ad if you have to. They'll likely try to keep this a balanced attack, so whoever the lead back is would still get enough volume to be a borderline RB2, more of a flex option there. So keep your eye on it in case Woody Marks isn't able to progress enough to be active in week 17. Finally, I'm not going to leave you hanging here on defenses because honestly, the most critical waiver wire ads during the fantasy playoffs are often defenses and streaming options there. The right or wrong defense can make or break your week, and several of the top defenses that you've been relying on all year, they are straight up falling apart. Kansas City, Cleveland, just to name a couple there. So it is time to get streaming and play the matchups here and pivot away from that. I talked about these in the stash video, so the recommendations remain the same here. If you're in a shallow league, check waivers and see if the Patriots or Tampa Bay defenses are available. The Patriots are playing the Jets. Tampa Bay is playing Miami, two teams, two very young, inexperienced quarterbacks that are literally a walking pick six waiting to happen. So those are good options for you guys that need a lower rostered option. Again, take a chance on the New York Giants. I know, but hear me out. They had a very solid game against Washington last week. Then this past week, they tore apart J.J. McCarthy there. And in week 17, they play Vegas. And again, you know how much Geno Smith loves to throw a pick six, so it's a very viable option this week. That wraps things up. Thank you so much for watching this video. That was our final waiver wire ad video of the year. But of course, again, stick around with me in the offseason. As I mentioned before, I'm not going anywhere. We're going to have plenty of videos to get you prepped and ready for 2026 ahead of schedule. And football should be consumed all year long. I am staunchly of the opinion of that. We will be talking free agency, which is super fun. Rookies with the Combine and the Senior Bowl as well. Landing spots, draft. It's going to be fun, so stick around. And of course, as always, you can follow me and find me across all social media platforms at It's Tier Time. So make sure that you are locked in, tuned in, subscribed, and turn on notifications. Stick around. It is going to be a fantastic offseason.